Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. Ready for some thought-provoking cerebral whipping and the destruction of ridiculous medical dogma? Want to shift those stale, moldy old paradigms? Well then, don that thinking cap of yours, get down in the cave, and join our host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, for this week's episode. Let's start spelunking.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. Today, we are honored to have with us Dr. Codi Peterson, a leading expert in the field of cannabis pharmacology. Dr. Peterson is a doctor of pharmacy and currently serves as a professor at the University of California, Irvine. His work focuses on understanding the complex interactions between cannabinoids and the human endocannabinoid system. With years of dedicated research and clinical experience, Dr. Peterson has become a very respected voice in cannabis therapeutics. He specializes in the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of cannabinoids, exploring how these compounds interact with our endocannabinoid system. Dr. Peterson's expertise extends beyond the laboratory. He's also a committed educator and advocate and regularly speaks at conferences and is a contributor to peer-reviewed journals. His goal is to bridge the gap between scientific research and practical applications in healthcare. Today, Dr. Peterson will be sharing his insights on the latest developments in cannabis pharmacology and its potential impact on medical treatments. This discussion was so engaging that we went really long, and I loved it because he is such a great educator, and I just couldn't edit it down to one episode. If you have any interest at all in cannabis and its potential for improving the human condition, you will love both of these episodes. This is really a deep dive into endocannabinoid physiology. That is what I consider an ultimate tutorial. If you're not a physician, please listen anyway, as he is able to explain and convey complex information in such an understandable manner. I know everyone will learn. Please enjoy this excellent two-part conversation that I have with Dr. Codi Peterson. All right, everyone, welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. I'm very happy to have our guest today, Codi Peterson, and Codi and I are going to talk about basically cannabis, and I guess we could call this Cannabinoids 101. And
something like that.
Yeah, so before we get into the meat of it, Codi, let's talk about how you got to where you are today and an expert in cannabinoids.
Yeah. Well, I sort of have grown into that title. Certainly I wouldn't have started there. But what I am an expert in is in medications because I'm a trained pharmacist. I have my doctorate and my PharmD, and I practice pharmacy in the state of California. I've done this for about 10 years in pediatrics. So I still do to this day, technically not to this day, to this night where I work in an emergency department 7 nights out of every 14.
Okay.
Now, that means that I'm trained to understand the way medicines work in the body, but also to translate that information to the necessary party. So this could be anywhere from physician to nurse to patient to guardian. There's a whole spectrum of people that the pharmacist is expected to translate complex information specifically about medicine and turn that into something actionable. And that's really what we find in cannabis as well. So I think that the pharmacist is already a great fit for the medical cannabis space. And I always had a knack for cannabis, or at least going back to my early college years. But no one taught me about cannabis or the way cannabis works. THC works even in the body in pharmacy school, which is a crying shame.
Right.
And I had to teach myself. Only later to have the wonderful opportunity to go back to school and get my master's degree. And I got my master's degree in medical cannabis science and therapeutics from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. So, when I went to pharmacy school over a decade ago, there was no such thing. In fact, only just a few years ago, there was no such thing, but progress.
So now, did you get your PharmD before you got your master's?
Yeah, I've got a bit of a Benjamin Button of education going on here. I actually went through what's called a 2-4, so I didn't have a bachelor's degree anyway. So I got my doctorate, and now I'm getting I finished my master's. I'm strongly considering a bachelor's degree. I just haven't figured out what yet.
Yeah. So when you were in your pharmacy and your PharmD program, they didn't have much attention or any attention to medical cannabis?
Showed up in one class. So this is,
Okay.
again, I went to what's called a 2-4. So that's 6 years of education. I
Right.
went through this all one school. And I didn't get my bachelor's. That's how you go to the program, as you're accelerated through. At Duquesne, we only learned about marijuana, not even cannabis, marijuana in one singular class. Can you guess the name of that class?
Illegal drugs and
drugs of abuse, right? It's
right.
no one mentioned it in neurology class when they said that when they should have said that this molecule in this plant interacts with a system shared by all vertebrate on planet Earth and can obviously have therapeutic effects, as it has been shown for thousands of years. No, they forgot that part, but they mentioned it in the part where it's addicting and all of that. So It's a little unfortunate, but it's changing. In the state of Pennsylvania, where Duquesne is located, the pharmacist is actually mandated in medical cannabis dispensaries. And so obviously this school is now fighting or grappling with the idea of like, how do we educate on this in a professional way and not pro cannabis and yada, yada.
Right. It's very interesting. Is it true that California was the first state to have recreational cannabis, or was it some other state?
No, that would actually be incorrect.
Okay.
California was the first state to have medical.
Okay.
And that was 1996. And it stayed that way for another almost 10 years, probably.
Okay.
Let's see. First of all, going back, before the 1930s, there was no such thing as illegal cannabis. Cannabis was just another plant. There wasn't. And then we restricted it with something called the Marijuana Tax Act, where we basically made it illegal to grow. And therefore, if you didn't have the permit, which you couldn't get, you were committing a crime. There's the beginning of cannabis criminalization. Nixon's war on drugs moves it into a Schedule I category, where it remains today. And oh my goodness, that was all good context for your question, but can you repeat your question to me, Stephen?
My question was California the first recreational state? And you said, no, it was the first medical.
Correct.
State.
And so federally it got clamped down on, and all 50 states followed suit in the 1971, essentially the Controlled Substance Act. And slowly, a few states challenged that, decriminalizing. I know Minnesota was one of the earliest states. Oregon, Washington State were leaders in that space. And there was, a whole ride of things. But California in 1996 legalizes. And then about 10 years later, you start to see other states joining into the medical field. And then the biggest state to go online, I think it was the first one, was 2012, which was Colorado.
Okay.
It might have not been the first one to vote, or it might have been the first one to turn on. But the medical, cannabis market was well established. These are just sort of the rules around when adults didn't have to obtain a medical card in most of these states. So 2012 is, I would say, when adult use turned online. And here we are 12 years later, and it's something to the effect of 25 states have adult use programs, and 38 states have some degree of medical cannabis. Maybe even more than that. Yeah. 42 maybe.
It's very interesting, from a historical standpoint. One of the reasons there was such a pushback against hemp and marijuana, which are both cannabis plants. And
which we'll learn in a minute.
We're going to get into that when we discuss the nuts and bolts of this. But it was Hearst, the big publisher and the paper giant, and I think he was the one who was very threatened by hemp, because hemp had some very superior qualities. We're not talking pharmaceutical now, but just handling and the fiber itself, and he was threatened by that, so wanted to demonize it, right?
Yeah, and that's one example of numerous times that cannabis was kind of pushed down or stigmatized. For, unfortunately, the benefit, there's a lot of criticism as well of Rockefeller in the petrochemical industry trying to suppress hemp seed oil and the fibers and plant substances available. I think all of that is somewhat true. How it all went together is hard to say, but we've got a mess. We've got a plant that has been used by humans for up to 15 to 30,000 years. This is, ancient Sumerians had a word for this plant. Ancient Chinese, it's in their first written text known in China, the first list of medicine ever written in China. And for some reason, the last 100 years, we criminalized it. We called it loco weed. We made marijuana a term, which is similar to what is arguably a racist or just derogatory term.
Let me interrupt
just
you.
So many things.
Let me interrupt you there
Go
because, I had heard, that they made it. They used the term marijuana as kind of a denigrating term to maybe the Latino and the Mexican population. That it wasn't a good name. It was a denigrating name, right?
Yeah, this is actually a kind of complicated story that's being juggled around. Look, there's no doubt, and there's plenty of evidence to say the war on drugs, specifically the war on cannabis as well, has been fueled by racism, has been inappropriately enforced across socioeconomic and racial lines. So we know this harms communities of color. Now, whether the term marijuana is racist, that's a little more argumentative. There is a very similar term coming from South and Central America that likely came in with those migrants and as we annexed California and all of these places. And media latched onto that and made marijuana a bad term, but marijuana with a G instead of an H, it goes back well before any of that racism and prohibition exists. So it's not exactly clear, but because it was the word that was used, it feels, oppressive. And I think that there's reason to feel that way. I would flip that and say, however, it is the federal government's legal definition of the substance, which it continues to classify in Schedule 1, which is the most highly addictive and have no medical use category. It sits up there with MDMA, ecstasy, heroin, and a few others.
Well, if you take out heroin, maybe the rest of them seems to be maybe misclassified in my opinion.
Oh yeah, let's keep going, right?
Yeah,
so psilocybin mushrooms,
right?
Peyote cactus,
right.
Which they contain very psychotropic molecules, but are not harming people at any level. If you go down to the second class, still considered highly addictive drugs, but have an acceptable medical use, and you'll giggle at this. Here you have amphetamine, methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine even falls into that because cocaine, when it's pharmaceutically made, is a Schedule 2, but if it's coming illegally, it's a Schedule 1. The same thing with fentanyl. If it's used in the medical sense, it's a Schedule 2, and if it's not, then they treat it as a Schedule 1. Right. It doesn't make sense how you could put plants in the same category as drugs, and I think that's really where the entire thing breaks down.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that'll change. I think the population of the United States in general understands that there is a significant benefit from these plant-based medicines. And I think that, it's a matter of when, not if. I really believe that. And I think we're getting towards that.
It's really hard to understand why we chose each plant, right? It's almost nonsensical. There are far more deadly plants in the forest. For example, one of the Amanita mushrooms, which grows commonly and looks like an edible variety, or even a psychedelic-ish variety, the Amanita muscaria, the red one with the white tops. There's an Amanita that's all white, and that Amanita is known as the death cap, and it will kill you if you ingest even just one of them.
Right.
Why isn't that mushroom illegal? But no, it's the one that is not deadly, but alters the way that you think and the way that you perceive the world. Why is that the illegal one, even though one is more deadly? That alone is an example, but we could keep going.
Sure.
The opium poppy is able to be grown ornamentally, but it's illegal the moment you take the white latex that grows inside of it and take it out of the plant. Now you've done something illegal. It is nonsensical.
Yeah, it's very interesting to look at the history of some of these things. I think the gentleman that wrote the book How to Change Your Mind, is it Michael Pollan?
Pollan.
Yeah, that's a great book. I would recommend everybody.
Great book.
Everybody read that because it shows just the lunacy about how some of these things have been scheduled, and it's just kind of ridiculous. But let's jump back into cannabis, because that's what we're here for today. We might have to come back and talk about mushrooms in the future. But,
I would love that. I mean,
yeah.
Plant medicine, pharmacognosy, and how plants in the history of the plant's medicine is really intriguing to me, especially in the context of modern knowledge and understanding of what the pharmacology could be, trying to cross-reference back to what it used to be used for. It's just a really exciting time, not to mention our ability to tease apart what's in these medicines now.
Right. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. It's fascinating. The more I learn about it, the more I want to learn more,
Cool.
So,
That's why I'm here.
yeah, let's talk about cannabis. You've
Let's
got
do
some slides to share with us.
Yeah. I whipped something up based on what we wanted to talk about today. It's not all inclusive. Certainly, we can't cover that in our talk, but I just wanted to give people something visual to check out while we chatted. So, we kind of mentioned that's me. I went to Duquesne in Pittsburgh, and then I got my master's in cannabis science. Kind of want to mention what I do in the cannabis space, which is I'm chief science officer of the Canigma. That's this website here. And the Canigma is a science-forward media company trying to answer people's questions about cannabis on Google. And what's kind of cool is we WebMD'd weed. And so we put an expert reviewing every article that we put out, like a pharmacist or a plant scientist or an extraction engineer or something like that. So we have a reviewer trying to make sure that the information you're getting is not just fluff, optimized for you to find on Google, but not optimized for your full understanding of a subject.
Gotcha.
Verbose, I apologize, but I'm also a founding member of a topic and a purpose that I feel strongly about, which is educating and integrating pharmacists into medical cannabis. So I'm a member of the PCCC, the Pharmacist Cannabis Coalition of California. And I also teach at University of California, Irvine to pharmacy students about medical cannabis. I've been in the hospital for about 10 years, and I've been an educator for paramedics for going on 5 years now. I teach firefighters how to give drugs in the field and how to dose them.
Right.
Cool. So now let's talk about cannabis. And we've already jumped into these words. So this is a great lead in, Stephen, is hemp and marijuana. So this is a really pertinent topic, and I'll tell you why on the next slide. But I want to put two definitions for you. You've got one plant. It's called Cannabis sativa. Technically, that is the scientific name. Okay. Cannabis sativa L. And now cannabis is both hemp and marijuana. It's all one species of plant. At least that's what the leading thought process is. Now, hemp, according to the US federal government, is any cannabis and any part of the cannabis, and technically anything made from that, that is less than 0.3% THC. And THC is the psychotropic portion of cannabis. The same way that alcohol is what gets you drunk in beer, THC is what gets you high in marijuana, although they don't work the same at all in the body. Now, hemp is usually rich in CBD. We'll talk about what that is a little bit later. Often used for industrial purposes, right? Making the hemp, the paper, the rope that we started talking about in the episode. Okay? That we'll get to when it was legalized. And now marijuana, that both have been illegal basically since 1970. Marijuana is any plant with more than that we classify as marijuana. Now, it can have 0.4% THC and 20% CBD, and that's still marijuana, according to the government. Even though it's got a ton of CBD, if it has anything more than 0.3%, that's marijuana. But generally, that's not what we're dealing with. We're usually dealing with modern varieties of cannabis, which are being grown, which are usually quite abundant in THC. You might be familiar. Sometimes 25, even listed as high as 35% of the cannabis flower can be THC. Often used for medical or recreational purposes. It can be either or, it can be both, and there's not a clear line there. But what I wanted to talk about here is at the bottom, think about this. Well, what about indica and sativa? And that'll come up in 2 slides. Now, when did you start hearing about hemp, Stephen?
Oh, I've heard about hemp for quite a while, but I think, this slide kind of shows when they came in with the Farm Bill, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was some stuff, there was some chatter about hemp, in some, certain parts of the country back in the 1990s. And if you lived through World War II, you would have seen a marketing campaign, Hemp for Victory, and where the U.S. federal government put a bunch of money into promoting the growth of hemp so that we could make ropes to fuel the war efforts. But then it was illegal again until 2014. Obama signed the 2014 Farm Bill, which, by the way, is the same Farm Bill that subsidizes corn and wheat and historically sugar and tobacco. The Farm Bill, which licensed research growers to start growing hemp, which is this low THC cannabis. Now, that went pretty well. Everyone was really excited. A lot of farmers bought in. So 2018, Donald Trump signed the 2018 Farm Bill. And when I say Donald Trump signed, they're the last person to sign off on it. But of course, it went through Congress. It has to be signed off. But in both cases, I guess the point of that is we've seen Republicans and Democrats be very favorable towards hemp. Anyway, permitted hemp growing, allowed hemp products to be sold, not sulf, sorry about that. And it has really led to what I would call the CBD green rush. And this is important context, is everybody started talking about CBD and everybody started a CBD company. And you heard everyone's going to be taking it for every ailment that they have. Unfortunately, that actually led to too much CBD being produced and a bottoming out of prices, something that used to cost $20,000 a kilo went to $2,000 a kilo. And now it's way less than that even. So big price compression happened, and we're still trying to figure it all out. But one thing that I don't talk very much about in this lecture, but is pertinent here, is there's a lot of states that are still keeping cannabis and marijuana illegal. But in those states, because of this federal change, because they made hemp illegal, and the way the Farm Bill was written, we have a lot of psychotropic cannabinoids like delta-8 THC that are being legally consumed in states. So I just wanted to throw that in there, but this is all in flux.
Yeah, let me interrupt you there because I want to talk about delta-8 versus the regular THC is delta-10, right?
Delta-9.
Delta-9? Okay.
You let me know when we want to jump up ahead of that. I might have it poorly ordered for this conversation, but we'll jump ahead and show people.
No, you don't have to jump ahead, but I want to ask you specifically, if you don't get to that, the difference between the delta-8 and the delta-9.
Yeah, let's get to it after I show everyone what delta-9 is, but I will totally explain.
Okay.
Because this is a lot of these slides are rollovers from some of my other lectures. You're looking at a University of California, Irvine slide, right? And in that context, I had already explained what delta-8 is, so I apologize for bringing it into the combo here. I wanted to talk about indica sativa for a second.
Perfect.
Is this the language that you usually hear when we're talking about cannabis?
Yes.
Most people hear this.
Right.
And look, sometimes people still say it. And here's a picture kind of describing. It's on both sides here. This is pulled directly from the Canigma. So the Canigma has a graphic and a whole article dedicated to what an indica sativa is. And it's actually, we've got a PhD in cannabis genetics, right? Gianni is the reviewer. So you can trust that this is credible information. And the truth is what we thought used to be true may not be as true as we thought. So here I want to point out indica. This is true. When, do you know the story of where these names came from, Stephen?
No, but I would love to.
Yeah, so you've got two different botanists who were naming plants, Lamarck and Linnaeus, okay?
Okay.
And these two individuals were categorizing plants in the late 1700s, okay? They didn't have cell service back then, right? So they couldn't talk, even though they were doing the same thing in different parts of the world. Linnaeus was in Europe. He was categorizing the plants as he found them, and he characterized a plant that was well known to people as cannabis sativa. Now, fun fact about the term sativa in botany or in this sort of categorization is sativa means cultivated variety. It means domesticated, essentially, right? Okay. So many of our plants are sativum or sativa, because it means this is the plant that humans have fostered. So the first cannabis, we still use that today. All of these plants are cannabis sativa L, and L stands for Linnaeus.
Okay.
So Indica, discovered probably 10, 20 years after. I'm not, a perfect historian, but this is, I assure you, that what happened is the indica variety was discovered by Lamarck, who was also categorizing plants. And he was instead traveling through India and what is now the Middle East and categorizing sort of along the way. And what he found was a plant that looked nothing like he had seen in Europe, which was the Cannabis sativa variety, but instead this chunky, shorter, stouter, darker plant. Okay, that
Right.
doesn't grow as tall and lanky in the big sunshine. So they said, oh, these must be different species of cannabis. Now we know there's one species of cannabis, but this is where the difference came from. Is Lamarck was in India and Linnaeus was in Europe, and they didn't have a way to agree or compare genetics, for example, of what these plants did. It turns out these are just different looking plants because this plant has been carried around the world by plants and animals and humans for millions of years. Obviously not humans for millions of years. But, it's a 9 million year old plant that grew on the central plains of Asia. It traveled naturally and along human trade routes, and it just started to develop these differences in appearance. Okay?
So were those, let me just interrupt you there then.
Please.
Primarily then, indica and sativa are the same thing, but because of just different growing areas, they manifested these different characteristics, the short, stocky versus the taller.
Yep, and the longer versus shorter. So the indica varieties had a tendency to grow in higher altitudes with shorter summers and colder nights.
Okay.
And the sativa had a more humid environment. By spreading out, it was less susceptible to perhaps fungal disease and things like that, and it grew closer to the equator. Now, how true and how this all came together, it's really, really challenging to piece together because we're talking about something that happened 9 million years ago, and then the evolution of that through unwritten history for tens of thousands of years. So the truth lies somewhere in the journey that cannabis took and the way we cultivated it. But what you need to know is when you look at the genetics of these plants, they are not significantly different. And if they are all cannabis sativa, some people would argue that there are subspecies that can be varieties, but indica and sativa are not one of them, or not all of them. There's 5 or 6 cannabis sativa subspecies afghanica, cannabis subspecies, and there's like all they're arguing over it still. But this, they agree, is not the truth. I want to point here, this is the most important part of this slide. You're going to go to the dispensary, they're going to say sativa's up and indica is down, and there's just no evidence for that. No scientist is claiming this. Even Leafly and the sort of these companies that made this and propagated it have backed away from that. It's more complicated than putting all the cannabis plants into 2 categories and saying one is sleepy and one is not. This is a complicated plant, as we'll learn in a second. The cannabinoids, the most important the pharmacologically active molecules, the terpenes, the essential oils of the cannabis plant, how old you are, whether you're male or female, how much you weigh, how much you're smoking and how you take it, not how much you're smoking, how much you're consuming, how much, and whether you're smoking or consuming edibles. These are the factors that will dictate the way cannabis makes you feel, not whether it's named indica and sativa by the guy who grows it. Kyle Cushman is a well-known cannabis cultivator. He's responsible for a famous variety known as strawberry cough. And this is what he says. If you got something that said, because this is what the growers do, this is 70% sativa, 30% indica. And it's like based on, and is it that, like, where is this coming from? And he's just getting to the point. It's funny names and loose histories, not science, that dictates these names.
Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor.
Introducing Troche, a line of professional products with patented and proprietary delivery systems that revolutionize phytocannabinoid administration. Troche products are scientifically engineered to provide fast-acting, long-lasting, reliable delivery of phytocannabinoids to support your health goals.
I started using this endocannabinoid support system several months ago, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to optimize their own endocannabinoid system.
Troche. Science, wellness, relief.
So the take-home message is it's all bullshit, whether it's indica or sativa.
Well, I didn't know I could cuss.
You can say
there's a lot of bullshit blended into truth, right? It's
Okay.
like it's a lot of misconstruing. It's even possible that in the 1970s, especially then, before cannabis had all been mixed together, what they were bringing over from either Amsterdam or which then came from the Dutch cannabis, which had a long history in India, whether those varieties were really more sedating than the sativas of yesteryear, it's hard to say. But now, because of prohibition, there's been so much underground inbreeding, mixing, everything's jumbled together. You can't call something indica or sativa. It's estimated that something like 90 or 95% of all varieties on the market are hybrids. It's just variety mixes of these rather than sort of these ancient varieties or ancient gene pools. So what the heck should we call them if we're not calling them strains? There's so many ideas out here, but I want to introduce your listeners to a few of them and kind of let them settle in. So this is from an article written by Matan, who brought me on to the Canigma years ago, and Dr. Arno Hasenkamp, who has written a paper, a critical one in this space, that kind of tries to define these words. So strains are types of cannabis that are distinguished by name, but there's no standardized or uniform features of that cannabis plant. So you've probably heard of somebody who you go to one dispensary and you buy something like Blue Dream or Bubba Kush, and you have it and you're like, this is a great effect. And then they run out because this happens. Supply chains are weird. Then you go to another dispensary and they have the same Bubba Kush and you're like, great, this should be wonderful. And you have a different experience. And the question becomes is why? And there's so many factors, but number one, this is an agricultural product. It has a lot of variety that's influenced by its environment. The seeds that I throw in my backyard are gonna grow different than the seeds that grow in your backyard, Stephen, even if they're genetically identical. They're the same. I took them from the same bag, right?
Right.
Now, two seeds from the same bag can even present very differently. If you imagine cannabis is like humans with an X and Y chromosome, and it is, there's boys and girls, then you could imagine that two seeds produced from the same mother and the same father could look quite different and act quite different. So it's so challenging to call something a strain, and there's no standardization. So there's a couple alternatives. Let's jump to the bottom one. These are chemovars. So some people argue this is the appropriate term for this cannabis because this is chemical varieties, right? So if you have a chemical variety, you can kind of try to classify what's in there. There's another classification that tries to group by the most abundant cannabinoids. This is called the chemotyping. So high THC marijuana would be type 1. Something that has a mix of THC and CBD would be type 2. And then something that's CBD rich would be type 3. If you want to read more about that, you totally can on this link to the website. There's just not enough time in the world to explain all the nuances here. But strains, all the scientific evidence out there suggests that this is not a consistent method of categorizing cannabis. Now,
let me interrupt you a second here because I think there's a great corollary in wine, and the French have a term called terroir. Right.
Okay.
And so you can have a Cabernet Franc grape in Margaux, France, and you can have the same grape in New York, and you can have the same grape in Napa Valley, and they're all the exact same genetically or close.
Yeah, or even cut probably from the same plant. Yeah.
But because of where they're planted, the soil, the microclimates, all of these things, like you mentioned, it's an agricultural product. So there is going to be variability, and there's even variability from one year to the other of the same vines because of the weather patterns and all of these other things. So it would be kind of foolish if you're getting into this space thinking that Bubba Kush is going to be the same at dispensary A and dispensary B. But I think that then brings up a question that maybe you can get to later on is, well, that's confusing for the consumer. because in the wine world, we expect there to be these different nuances. In fact, we look for that and we celebrate that.
Yeah,
But
we enjoy them. We're like, oh, I like this about this one instead of this about this one.
Exactly. So it just I just had to bring that corollary up because you make a very valid and good point that as an agricultural product, it is not going to be like a synthetic that's virtually the same lot after lot after lot.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be synthetic. You can take a plant. We can take those ingredients that are found in the cannabis flower, the cannabinoids and the terpenes, which we're about to learn, and we can then, structure them back in. Now, is that better or worse than a whole plant? Look, I'm not in the business of doing that, but I know that our systems are set in place for consistency and expectation, and the variability introduced by, being a botanical product, an agricultural product, is really hard for, let's say, the FDA to wrap their head around. So if we're going to get this into the medical space, it's highly likely that it's going to end up being a processed product. But that doesn't mean we should keep the plant illegal. So I like this. Like, think about this. You planting a garden, right? This is exactly the same idea as your grapes. You've gone out there, you picked two different kinds of seeds. They're both cantaloupe, right?
Right.
They're going to have different names.
Right.
And that's a variety, right? And it's going to be different. Now, most of the time, vegetables have what's stable genetics. So over a certain amount of time, once you've proven that the fruit of that plant is consistent, you can give it a name and you can have something called an agreed upon like heirloom variety or sort of what's arguably a strain name. But no one's doing that in cannabis. There is no agreed upon standard for what Bubba Kush even is. And so there can't be the standard, the Gala apple or, these named consistencies because we haven't figured that all out yet. Or at least it hasn't been adopted formally. So a lot to still figure out in this space. To be honest, even the experts have not agreed or figured out at all. So I want to show you this. This is really important. So here's our really important player that we've been talking about all day right here, THC. You can see my cursor, right?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, perfect. Yep. Okay. So Delta 9 THC is the molecule that we're dealing with. When we take cannabis, the cannabis plant, process it down, and eventually, like let's say you rolled it into a joint and you smoked it. It's a marijuana variety that's rich in THC. This is the molecule that's going to have its pharmacologic effect on you. We'll see what that is in a second, and I'll dive into it. But I wanted to show you where it's coming from in the plant first. Do you know what this is down here, Stephen?
That looks like a bud.
It's the
flower,
super zoomed in, version of a cannabis flower, extremely zoomed in to the point where we're seeing the microscopic appendages known as trichomes. Sometimes if you took a cannabis flower and you hold it up to light, it looks crystally. Right. These are zooming in on those crystals. That's what these are. They're tiny resin heads standing atop protrusions on the plant. The word trichome is derived from the Greek word for hair. So these are hair-like structures. These are technically called glandular trichomes or capitate glandular trichomes. A gland at the top or on the head, capitate, of the hair-like structure.
Right.
Inside of there is where the cannabinoids are made. The medicine in the cannabis plant is not made in the plant, but it's in these little resin heads produced at the tips that are there probably to protect the plant from either UV light or insects or both, and all just in general to protect the flower. Now, do you think that this is a male cannabis plant or a female cannabis plant?
Oh man, that's I'd have to lift up the tail.
Yeah, exactly. Give it a feel. You know, what's interesting is for a fact it's a female cannabis plant because generally speaking, although nothing in science is guaranteed, the male plants do not produce these resin heads. The male plants are not consumable for their medicine. They're used for hemp. They're used for a lot of purposes and for their pollen, their genetic variety. Right. But they do not make an abundant amount of resin heads that can be then converted into cannabinoid medicine. Interesting. Yeah. So cannabis is known as a dioecious plant. So it has male and female. I already mentioned this, an X and a Y chromosome. Right. Look, just like humans, the girls have two X's, the boys have an X and a Y. And the pollen from the male has to fertilize the flower of the female.
Gotcha.
It's kind of like you would imagine any other plant. This is a zoomed in shot of the female flower, the very tip of one little protrusion of that flower. And inside of each one of those little resin heads is a biochemical synthesis factory, right? It's making bioactives, the smelly essential oils, which we'll talk about on the next slide, and these highly valuable, very bioactive medicines known as cannabinoids. Now, canna means from the plant in which it was inspired. Benoid is just or inoid is just the expression of a group of molecules. So the oids.
Gotcha.
Cannabinoids, CBGA, is what's produced first in this resin head. Okay. This can be taken orally as a medicine. It's bioactive. It might have therapeutic benefits. We won't get too deep into them. But even starting there, we're now harvesting this molecule. It's not the one you've heard about, right? The ones you've heard about are over here, THC and CBD. But very much this product is moving into the medical space and may have therapeutic utility. Then the plant takes CBGA that it's produced and it puts it down one of 3 pathways. It either pushes it over to THCA,
which is an acid form.
Right. Sorry.
Okay.
So I should have read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Let's start with THC, right? This is what you've heard of it. It's tetrahydrocannabinol. But
Correct.
the plant doesn't actually produce that. That is only produced under certain circumstances, like lighting it on fire, like smoking a joint, or if you're making edibles. Do you know what you have to do before you make brownies with marijuana?
You got to get the brownie mix.
Well, okay, true. You got to get your butter and your brownie mix and all the ingredients. Yeah. But you also have to bake your cannabis. You have to heat up the cannabis before you infuse it into your brownies. Did you know?
I had heard that, but yes, I did not know that.
We call that decarboxylation.
Okay.
Sometimes it's called activating. I don't really like that term because we know that the acid form is active as well. But the acid form, THCA, which is actually what's in the plant before you light it or before you bake it,
right?
THCA doesn't get into our brain and cause an intoxication.
So
it does get into our bodies.
Show the folks the carboxyl group so that they can.
I love that. So the colors are actually indicative of what we're dealing with. But here, the carboxylic acid group is. I'm sorry. The green part is inappropriately moved. Here's the carboxylic acid group. This OOH or COOH. It's here and here. Now, when it moves over to THC, oops, so sorry, everyone. The carboxylic acid group of THCA is decarboxylated to where this red box is, and it is gone.
Right.
Okay, so that's a really intriguing change that allows the drug to get into the brain where it has its psychotropic effects.
So is it the carboxyl group that precludes it from getting through the blood-brain barrier?
Correct. That's exactly right. It adds water solubility, and water solubility is not necessarily desirable for the blood-brain barrier. It's complicated. There's a lot of theories on what exactly is happening at that blood-brain barrier. But yes, you can take a large dose of THCA. Let's imagine you took a 1 gram bud of cannabis flower. Okay. It's not a lot, but it's not a little, right? If you smoked that, you would be quite intoxicated. Part of ingesting that would be taking something to the effect of 200 milligrams, and it's unlikely to get you high. However, if you had thrown that cannabis bud in the oven for 20 or 30 minutes and then taken it out and eaten it, it's almost guaranteed to be quite intoxicating because it gets activated. So I think that's one important factor. So the plant makes the cannabinoid acids, the A's here that I'm circling. And then if you heat that cannabis molecule up, you get what's more commonly known as CBD, THC, or sometimes CBG. One more. You'll see this product, CBN, available in a lot of products. So if you take the THC molecule and you continue to heat it up or put it under certain circumstances, you will see it convert naturally into a molecule known as cannabinol. And cannabinol is the more stable form, and this is what can be found in really old cannabis. as THC slowly degrades naturally into something known as CBN. So there's a lot of word soup here, acronym soup going on. But everyone knows THC. It's known as Delta 9 THC. Most people have heard of CBD, right?
Right.
And this is the biosynthetic pathway that sort of gets us there pharmacologically.
Now, what about CBN? I mean, it looks to me like it's almost an identical structure to the THC, except maybe a couple more double bonds.
That's exactly right. It's called the oxidized form.
Okay.
And it does indeed have more double bonds. It's got more less hydrogen and more. What's the word I want to say? Anyway, my synthetic chemistry is missing right now, but it is very structurally similar. It makes sense. It's the natural degradation product. Right. The difference is CBN structure is a little different in three-dimensional space. And that slight difference means that when it interacts with the receptors in our body, it does not activate nearly as strongly. So it's estimated to be 1/10 or 100 less potent than THC itself. So I think that's something interesting. CBN is often touted as the sleepy cannabinoid. The evidence is mixed, but increasingly pointing to maybe it can be beneficial for sleep. CBD, I want to point out a couple structural things while we're on this slide. Let's nerd out on the chemistry a little bit.
Right.
So THC, because that's the one that we talk about all the time, I want you to notice that it's made up of 3 rings. It's all connected in these 3 rings. You can see if the lines are connecting for our non-organic chemists, we've got entire rings. If you look down below to CBD, you can see there's no connection between this OH group and these carbons over here.
Right.
That means it's a bicyclic molecule, 2 rings, right?
Okay.
But the big difference is it's not connected around this one carbon. So you could imagine if you've got something that's connected in 2 points, it can't wiggle or bend. It's it's structurally rigid.
Right.
But if something's only connected at 1 point, here we go, then it can spin around that 1 point. Imagine it's if you're hanging something on a cork board and you have 2 pins, it's going to stay right there. Other than the wind comes, it still might stay. But if you had only 1 pin, it would be wiggling back and forth. It's that same sort of wiggliness that allows CBD to do entirely different things in the body than THC. And it's the reason that CBD is what we call psychotropic or intoxicating.
Okay.
Up here at Delta 9 THC, another important, let's call it chemistry thing, is there's something you'll see in those illicit markets known as Delta 8 THC. Okay, so in Delta 9 THC, this double bond in the ring is right here. This is called the 9 position. It's not that important. But the 9 position is the way the cannabis plant always positions that double bond. The cannabis plant consistently makes Delta 9 THC, Delta 9 THC. It doesn't fold the molecule into Delta 8, which is where this double bond here would move over 1 degree to the left. So it's as if the hands on the clock moved from 9 to 8. And because of that, we see again a small structural change in 3 dimensions, and therefore a slight change in the pharmacology, the way the drug affects people. For Delta 8, it's estimated that it is less potent than THC, estimated to be about half. And if you remember CBN, I said 1/10 or less. Delta 8 is estimated to be half as potent as Delta 9.
Now, how do you get Delta 8? Do they have to manipulate that, or is there a natural endogenous process for that?
That's exactly right. It's a great question. The truth of the matter is no, the plant does not make Delta 8. Okay. Now, under very rare circumstances, sometimes in the process of breaking down into CBN, Delta 9 will turn into Delta 8 and then go to CBN. So it has been found in extremely small amounts, and it's thought to be a natural degradation product of Delta 9.
Okay.
It's also thought that when you burn marijuana and you smoke high THC cannabis, what happens is those high heats can produce a little bit of Delta 8 as well. However, That's not what's showing up in the average gas station in Texas.
Right.
And then you have to understand that CBD is legal, Delta 9 is illegal, Delta 8 is a gray area. So
Right.
everyone is producing massive amounts of CBD. Remember, the price dropped heavily.
Right.
They're using chemical manipulation, using light, heat, and acids to close this ring and try to make Delta 8, something very similar. Now, when you do that, you produce some Delta 9. They're taking that and, I'm sure disposing of it, not selling it anywhere.
Right.
And then they're taking that Delta 8 and they're moving that into products as well. But this is a very different process than the plant using enzymes, right? This is our green arrow is an enzymatic production in the plant. That's a protein folding over and over consistently, like somebody who works in retail folding their clothes. My clothes never look as good as the way they fold them in the store. But this is how good the cannabis plant folds that molecule every time. Now, when it comes to taking CBD in a laboratory and making this, it looks more like my folding. It's kind of haphazard. You mostly get what you want, but there's some other stuff and wrinkles that we didn't really want to deal with. So there are concerns around the purity and the safety of Delta 8 because it's usually being made in this what I call a post-synthetic, not what scientists have called a post-synthetic route as opposed to a biosynthetic route.
So let me unpack that just a little bit.
Yeah, please, because
so the audience can kind of get because everybody's looking at, I can get Delta 8 down at the BP station,
Yep, true.
So is it correct then that really Delta 8 is strictly a synthetic byproduct from CBD? Is that a fair way to put it?
All the Delta 8 on the market because it's only produced, it's only naturally occurring in obscenely obscure tiny amounts. We are manipulating chemicals to produce it. Yes, all the products on the market.
And what's your thoughts about the efficacy of Delta 8 versus Delta 9 as far as some of its beneficial actions?
Yeah, so from a pharmacologic perspective, I really don't have a major objection to Delta 8. My concern lies in the production and the safety measures. Like, I'm not biased towards Delta 8. If Delta 9 is awesome, I'm not convinced that Delta 8 is a problem. But I am questioning, where is it coming from? And should we, if we're producing it man-made, should that be drug development and not plants? I'm of that mindset. I think Delta 8 could be a tremendous medicine. But if it's not coming from the plant naturally, we shouldn't be making it and putting it into products. We have to test it like we would a drug. And there are numerous occasions where when people make drugs without any mindfulness to what's actually in there, where the contaminants can exist, there have been bad cases where, for example, ecstasy that was made poorly on the streets. It had the wrong version of ecstasy that caused someone to have a heart attack. These sort of things are well known to happen, and I have concerns around that. As far as the efficacy, there's a study on it. One of the godfathers of cannabis research, Raphael Mechoulam, he's well known and well respected. He isolated and made this molecule and gave it to children, and it worked great.
Yeah.
It was a small study. It's not good enough to justify it. But I'm not saying the Delta 8's the problem as much as I'm saying the way we're making it is the problem.
Well, that kind of reminds me of seed oils, right? I mean, linoleic acid, all of the horrible effects now from these seed oils. It's not that the original seed was such a bad actor. Like, you can take a sunflower seed and eat it, but when you take it through all of these processes to extract the oil, they put all of this other nonsense that's not so healthy for you.
And it's also just it's unnaturally consolidating one nutrient while taking out all of the rest, right? We're doing that same thing as isolating the CBD and manipulating it, like you said, as opposed to taking it in its whole form where it was naturally at. And some would criticize me that that's the appeal to nature fallacy. And, maybe that's true. Maybe I am biased towards nature. But I'm just going to say, it's not nature that's killing 80,000 Americans every year from overdoses, right? There is no plant that people are killing themselves with. And the drugs that are killing people are usually synthetic. And if they're not synthetic, they're an isolate. They're cocaine as opposed to coca. And so I'm going to, if you want to call it my a fallacy to nature, fine. But personally, that's where my ethos lies.
I would strongly align with that. I mean, I think that it's hard to argue that man is smarter than nature.
I haven't seen it play out that way yet. We consistently see time after time, we think we've figured it all out, and then we were wrong. Whether it was trans fats because they were shelf stable and we could do everything. Like you're talking about, seed oils might be a great example in the future. Seed oils are extremely high in, they're self-stable. They're extremely high in, like you said, linoleic acid. Sorry. They're just so annoying that linoleic and linolenic are so similar.
Yeah.
The omega-6 fatty acid. And this actually all plays into, hopefully, one of my next slides. I can't remember what order they're in, but the endocannabinoid system that I can't wait to talk about.
Let's get into it.
I'm constantly exploring new avenues to enhance well-being and address any health concerns. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to an exciting supplement called Stem Regen, which I take daily and genuinely believe could revolutionize your health journey as well. Stem Regen stands out as a game changer in the realm of wellness. Crafted from 5 potent plant extracts, it boasts a remarkable ability to stimulate the release of your body's own stem cells from your red bone marrow. Why is this significant? Well, stem cells are the superheroes of our body's natural repair system. They possess the extraordinary capacity to morph into various cell types, aiding in tissue regeneration and repair. As we age, the quantity of circulating stem cells in our system reduces significantly, impairing our body's ability to heal and rejuvenate itself effectively. Stem Regen steps in to counter this decline by kickstarting the release of stem cells into circulation, thereby bolstering your body's innate repair mechanisms. Once unleashed into your bloodstream, these mobilized stem cells actively seek out areas of damage or injury, initiating the healing process. By incorporating Stem Regen into your daily routine, you're essentially empowering your body to tap into its own regenerative prowess more efficiently. I firmly believe that Stem Regen could be a valuable addition to your wellness regimen, especially if you're seeking to fortify overall health and vitality, accelerate tissue repair, or expedite recovery from injury or illness. This first of its kind stem cell mobilizer is changing the game in regenerative medicine. Don't wait to unleash your body's innate healing capabilities. Visit stemregen.co/Dr. Steven, that's with a PH, and use the code SBPOD to get a 15% discount off your first order of Stem Regen. I hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If you think you might have tickled just a few neurons inside that cerebral cortex, please spread the word to your friends and colleagues and tell them that they need to get spelunking. Also, if you can take a minute to leave a review on your podcast provider of choice, and especially Apple Podcasts, that would greatly help the show and be so appreciated, provided it's positive. And if not, then just keep your pie hole shut and stay down in that cave. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.